Welcome to Finding Holiness, where we delve into timeless Torah wisdom, revealing the sacred in everyday moments. Join us on a journey to elevate your spirituality and discover holiness in every aspect of life. I'm your host, Rabbi David Kadosh, and together, let's embark on a path of spiritual exploration. I hope you enjoy this next episode. Erev Tov Lekulam. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition of our series on Megilat Esther. We are studying this holy Sefer in Tanakh just in time for Purim to finish it. Tonight we are going to be looking again at two chapters in depth. We're going to be studying Perek Hey and Perek Vav. That's chapter 5 and chapter 6. I recommend everyone here tonight to have a Chumash next to you to follow along with me. But if you don't have one, that is okay. Bruchim haba to all those who are here live listening and to those listening on our podcast, findingholiness.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you hear your podcast. Thank you very much for tuning in. And of course, on our website, you can catch previous episodes, much more Torah to be shared and spread. We have to mention our sponsors. The Shiur of Megilat Esther is sponsored Le'ilu Nishbat Mrs. Alegria Bemaman Alegria Bat Rika Zichnai Bracha by her loving grandchildren. And again, we shout out a great thanks to the family for sponsoring this series. May the words of Torah that we say this evening be le'ilu nishmatam. Again, for those just joining us, we are going to study today two perakim, chapter 5 and chapter 6, continuing where we left off from last week. So without further ado, we are heading right into it. Perek Hey, Pasuk Aleph, Vayhi, Bayom HaShelishi. And it was on the third day, Vatilbash Esther Malchut. Esther donned royalty. Vata'amod Bahatzar Bet HaMelech. She stood in the inner courtyard, HaPenimit. Nochach Bet HaMelech, facing the king's palace. VeHaMelech Yoshev Al Kiseh Malchuto Bebet HaMalchut. While the king was sitting on his royal throne. Nochach Petach Habayit, facing the entrance of the palace. Of course, we ended off last week with Mordechai basically telling Esther, listen, you got to do this. This is why you were put here in this place. You cannot just hold back and wait for salvation to come from elsewhere. You have to step up to the plate and act upon the situation, given the position that you own. So Vahi Bayom HaShelishi, and it was on the third day. The Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer says this was the third day of the fast. She commanded everybody to fast for 3 days, and this is the third day of the fast. And it was towards the end of the day, so she was in her weakest state at this point. Some say it was, the Rashi brings this quoting the Megillah, that it was the third day after Haman's decree was sent out, which was the second day of the fast, according to Rashi. And Targum says this could have been the third day of Pesach, the 17th of Nisan. That's how the Targum wants to say. And she donned her royal robes. Vatilbash Esther Malchut. And the reason we did this was that so the guards would not prevent her from entering the courtyard. Malchut literally means royalty. She donned not just clothes of royalty, but the Gemara tells us she donned a spirit of prophecy. The Malchut is one of the character, the Sfirot of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Malchut, and that's what she donned, the spirit of prophecy, when she went into the chambers of Ahasuerus. She went Bachatzar Bet HaMelech. This is the king's private quarters, HaPenimit, the inner room. And there was a great siyata dishmaya here that took place. It was where Ahasuerus received the public. Kadosh Baruch Hu arranged it that the king to be in the throne room, which is closer to the courtyard, more than where his private chambers was, so he would see Esther immediately and act upon it, rather than someone telling him that she was there uncalled for. So moving on to Pasuk Bet. Vahi Chirot HaMelech et Esther HaMalka, and it was when the king noticed Esther the queen, Omedet Behatzer, standing in the courtyard. Nase'ah chen be'ainav. She found favor in his eyes. Vayoshet HaMelech le'Esther et sharvit hazahav asher beyado. The king extended to Esther the gold scepter that was in his hand. Vatikrav Esther vatiga berosh hasharvit. And Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. So this Sharvit HaZahav, this golden scepter, the idea of stretching it over was to give her permission to approach. Without that, she wasn't allowed to approach. But more than that, this was a sign for Esther that Ahasuerus was really taking her under his wing. She was going to be under her protection. I can imagine that Esther was feeling a lot more comfortable at that moment. All the nerves racked up inside of her. At this point, she now feels the fact that he stretched out the scepter, I might be okay. Although we still gotta say the request. Nevertheless, at least I'm not going to die at this point. Moving on to Pasuk Gimel. Vayomer la hamelech. The king said to her, Ma lach Esther Hamalka. What is it for you, Queen Esther? Uma ba'kashatech. What is your request? Ad chatzi hamalchut ve'inaten lach. Even if it be until half the kingdom, it shall be granted to you. Up to ad chatzi hamalchut. Even if you should ask for half the kingdom, says Rashi, then I'll give it to you. Or even if it means that we rule jointly, says the Al-Sheikh. Some want to say that the Gemara says that this was a hint that Ahasuerus was giving to Esther, that he would not consent to rebuilding or restarting the construction of the Bet HaMikdash, which was situated halfway across his kingdom. That's the lashon of Ad Hatzi HaMalchut. Moving on to Pasuk Daled. Vatomer Esther. Esther said, Im ala melech tov, if it pleased the king, Yavo HaMelech veHaman hayom, el HaMishteh asher asiti lo. Let the king and Haman come today to the feast that I have prepared for him. The Gemara offers a whole bunch of explanations on why Esther invited Haman to this feast. And she had, according to, she had all of these ideas in mind. We're going to list them. There's 12 of them listed in the Gemara. Number one, this was to lay a trap for him. Two, to lull him into a false sense of security that, okay, I'm going to be in the quarters of Ahasuerus, I'm safe. Another reason why she invited him there was to keep an eye out for him. Another reason, the fourth reason, is to allay any suspicions that he might have that she was Jewish. In case he thought that she was Jewish, Haman's going to now see, I'm with Ahasuerus, there's no way that she was Jewish. Number 5, so that the Jews should not lose their ability to pray and repent. Knowing that they were there, they would realize that, knowing that she was there, they wanted to, this was a way that the Jews would not count on her and therefore neglect their own teshuvah and tefillah. Number 6, so that she could charge Haman to his face for what he did. Number 7, the Gemara says, so that heaven would see how difficult of a situation she was putting herself through, so that Hashem should have extended mercy on her. The 8th reason why she invited Haman was to arouse Ahasuerus' jealousy over the fact that she was friendly with Haman, even if it meant losing her own life as well. The 9th reason why she invited Haman, so that if Ahasuerus were to agree to execute Haman, it could be carried out immediately before he changed his mind. Another reason why she invited Haman is to arouse the jealousy of Ahasuerus over Haman's political ambitions. That maybe he will see how Haman is reaching for the top, and that would arouse the jealousy, and he would take action. The 11th reason, the Gemara says, why she invited Haman was to elevate Haman even further, because the greatest downfall comes as a result of a person who considers himself arrogant. The more arrogant the person acts, the more arrogant a person believes, then the harder he falls. Then the last reason is because the Reshaim often suffer a downfall during a feast, when they are drinking and they're drunk and they're not thinking properly, and this is the reason why she invited Haman to the feast. So 12 reasons the Gemara lists. I laid them out all for you. You can choose, of course, Elu velu divrei Elohim chayim. They're all good, they're all kosher. Whichever one resonates with you, that's the one that you can share with your family. So Esther told Ahashverosh, I want you and Haman to come. Yavo el hamishte asher asiti lo. Today, Esther meant for the king to realize that she had a major request to make, which she would only reveal to him at the feast. Why? Because that's when a person's in good spirits. When you're drinking and you're having a good time, I can lay down the major requests that I have. Moving on to Pasuk Hey. Vayomer HaMelech. So king commanded, Va'maharu et Haman. Bring Haman quickly. La'asot devar Esther, to fulfill Esther's word. Vayavo HaMelech ve'Haman el hamishte asher aseta Esther. So the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared. It wasn't la'asot devar Esther, to comply, to fulfill what Esther wanted. Ahasuerus really saw how troubled Esther was, says the Vilna Gaon, and that she wouldn't reveal what was bothering her until the actual mishteh. So he wanted to begin right away, start the feast, because I need to know what's wrong, start as swiftly as possible so that I can get to the bottom of this. Moving on to Pasuk Vav. Vayomer HaMelech leEsther b'mishteh hayayin. The king then said to Esther during the wine feast, Ma she'elatech ve'inaten lach. What is your request? It shall be granted to you. Uma bakashatech, and what is your petition? Ad chatzi malchut vete'as, even if it be until half the kingdom, it shall be fulfilled. Here we see two different terms with regards to a request. We have she'elatech and bakashatech. She'elatech is a personal request. Bakashatech is a petition on behalf of others. Ahasuerus is telling Esther whether it's a personal request that you want or it's something that you are asking on behalf of other people, I am ready to provide it for you. Ad chatzi ha-malchut v'te'as, both would be fulfilled. Im atzati chen, pasuk het. Pasuk zayin. Vatan Esther vatomar. So Esther responded and said, She'elati ubakashati, my request and my petition. In other words, to say, I'm not interested in what you think I'm interested. I don't want half the kingdom. I don't want to join you in power in half the kingdom. I don't want even the Bet HaMikdash. I want my own personal request and my own personal petition. Of course, she wanted the Bet HaMikdash, but that's not the reason why she was there. I don't want money. I don't want power. I want something that is meaningful and important to me at this moment. She'elati ubakashati. Im matzati chen pasuk chet. If I have found favor be'enei hamelech, in the king's eyes, v'im al hamelech tov, and if it pleases the king, latet et she'elati, to grant my request, ve'la'asot bakashati, and fulfill my petition, then yavo hamelech ve'haman el hamishte asher eseh lahem, let the king and Haman come to the feast that I will make for them. Umahar eseh kidvar hamelech, and tomorrow I shall fulfill the king's word. What was Esther doing over here? In very, very simple terms, she was stalling. She was taking as much time as she can. Why would she do this? She was hoping to receive a favorable siman, a favorable sign from heaven before making her request, as the Ibn Ezra writes. Sometimes you just need to have that little sign from above that's going to tell you everything is going to be okay. She as much as she was happy that she got to that point, she needed something else. And tomorrow I will do kidvar hamelech, as the king wants. Tomorrow I'm going to state my request, not because I'm worthy to ask for anything, but only because the king requests me or bids me to do so. And that's why I'm going to tell you. Moving on to Pasuk Tet, 9th verse of chapter 5. Vayetze hamelech bayom hahu. Vayetze Haman bayom hahu. So Haman went out on that day, sameach vetov lev, joyful and exuberant. Vechirot Haman et Mordechai b'sha'ar hamelech. But when Haman noticed Mordechai in the king's gate, velo kam velo za mimenu, and he did not stand up, he did not even stir before him, didn't even move, meaning didn't even bow down. Vaimale Haman al Mordechai chema. Haman was filled with wrath at Mordechai. Al Mordechai chema. Earlier, when Mordechai wouldn't bow down or to Haman, the Megillah states that Haman vayimale Haman chema. He was filled with rage. And now it's saying Al Mordechai chema. He was filled with wrath at Mordechai. Why the addition? Mordechai's earlier refusal to bow down could have been just out of religiosity, right? We said that he was maybe having an emblem of Avodah Zarah. I'm not bowing down because of idolatry. But now, his clear refusal to bow down, to even rise, to even move. It's not saying that he didn't bow down. He's not showing him any respect. That clearly it was out of personal contempt. That he was doing dafka against Haman, and this is what really, really enraged Haman at this point. Pasuk Yud, vayitapak Haman. But Haman restrained himself. Vayavo el beto. And he went back home. Vayishlach, vayavet oavav, ve'et Zeresh ishto. He sent and he summoned his friends and Zeresh his wife. Zeresh was the daughter of Tatenai. Tatenai was the Persian governor of the region, which also included Judea, so she was an important lady. And he called her for some advice. Vaysaper lahem Haman et kevod osro verov banav. Pasuk Yud Aleph. Haman recounted to them the glory of his wealth and of his many sons. Ve'et kol asher gidelo hamelech ve'et asher niseo. And all the ways in which the king promoted him, an hasarim ve'avdei hamelech, and elevated him, ve'et asher niseo la'asarim ve'avdei hamelech, and elevated him above the officials and all the royal servants. Some want to say, the Vilna Gaon, that why did he begin speaking about his wealth? When a person starts talking about the money and the possessions that he has, he felt by doing so, it would bring him into a good mood. Look at what I have, look at the power I have, look at the position, look where I am in society. To remove him from these thoughts of anger and rage, he started to talk about all the good things that he had. The Al-Sheikh says that there are three things in life that bring a person to happiness: his wealth, his children, and his greatness. And all these three things are hinted to in this pasuk. Vaysaper Haman et kevod osro, the greatness of his honorable wealth, rov banav, the many children that he have, and ve'et asher niseo, the fact that he was elevated above the positions of everyone else, and that's what brought him happiness. Pasuk Yud Bet, vayomer Haman. Haman said, Af lo hevia Esther hamalka im hamelech, ela mishte asher asa takim oti. Queen Esther brought no one but myself to accompany the king to that feast. Vegam lemachar ani karulai hamelech, and also tomorrow I am being asked to join another feast with the king and Esther. The Malbim says that at this point, Haman felt that he was really, really important, that he was going to be needed. Esther called him over so that he can convince Ahasuerus to accede to whatever request Esther had. V'chol zeh, and all this greatness that I have, all this money that I possess, all the children that are under my wing, kol zeh enenu shoveli. Nothing is worth it. Bekol et asher ani ro'et Mordechai HaYehudi. As long as I see Mordechai, the Jew, Yoshev b'sha'ar HaMelech, sitting at the king's gate and not getting up for me. Of course, tremendous lesson over here, how arrogance can get to your head. You have literally everything in the world, and one guy disrespects you, and it's worth everything you have is worth nothing. As long as Mordechai is sitting at the gate, the queen is putting me on her pedestal. Look where I am in life, and he continues to to ignore me. Vatomer lo. So look at the advice his wife gives him. Vatomer lo zeresh ishto v'chol oavav. Zeresh, his wife, and all of his loving friends told him, Yasu ayetz gavoa hamishim amma. Let them make a gallows 50 cubits high, about 25 meters. Uva boker, and in the morning, emor lamelech, speak to the king, veitlu et Mordechai alav, and have them hang Mordechai on it. Uvo im hamelech el hamishte sameach, then accompany the king to the feast in good spirits. Vayitav hadavar lifnei Haman, vayas ha'etz. And this advice really pleased Haman, and he had the gallows made. 25 meters is very, very, very tall. Haman considered it beneath his dignity to avenge himself against Mordechai over a personal matter. So what he did was he got the people to build this tall gallows to scare everybody. He wanted everybody to see, someone is going to be hung, in order to instill fear. There's an amazing midrash over here that says that how do you find a piece of wood that is 50 gallows, 50 cubits high, how do you find a piece of wood so long? And he couldn't find one, so he went to Parshandata. Parshandata was the governor of the area of Hare Ararat, the mountains of Ararat, and Parshandata went to the area where Noach's ark was situated on the mountain of Ararat in the area of Turkey, and he brought back a beam from Noach's ark. That was the gallows that extended 50 cubits tall. All right, the stage is set. Haman is ready to request and Mordechai get hung on these gallows, but not before what I believe is the climax of the entire Megillah, which is this opening few verses of the 6th chapter. We are in Perek Vav, Pasuk Aleph. Balayla hahu, on that night, Nadeda shenat hamelech, the king's sleep was disturbed. Vayomer, and he said, Lehavi et sefer hazichronot divrei hayamim, to bring the book of records, the Chronicles. Vayu nikraim lifnei hamelech, and that they be read before the king. That night between the two feasts, Nadeda shenat hamelech, his sleep was disturbed. Achashverosh was awake. He couldn't sleep. He was wondering, why did Esther invite Haman? What does she have with him? Were they plotting against him, says Rashi? The Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer says that Achashverosh was woken up by a bad dream. And in that dream, Haman tried to murder him. And that's why he couldn't sleep. So he asked Leavi et Sefer HaZichronot to read it, to help him fall asleep. You read a book at night in your bed, it helps you fall asleep. Some want to say that since nobody warned him about this potential conspiracy between Esther and Haman, he thought maybe the reason is that he neglected to reward someone who deserved rewarding, someone who was an informant in a positive light. And of course, that was Mordechai with Bigtan Vateresh. Pasuk Bet, Vaimatzeh Chatuv. And it was found to be written there, Asher Igid Mordechai al Bigtana Vateresh, that Mordechai denounced Bigtan and Teresh, Sheneh Sarisei HaMelech, two of the king's chamberlains, Mishomnei Asaf, the guardians of the threshold, Asher Bikshu Lishlach Yad BaMelech Hashverosh, who had sought to send their hand, in other words, to kill the king of Ahashverosh. Haman had convinced Ahashverosh that he was the one who saved him. And now the king is opening up the book of Chronicles, Divrei Yamim, and he had mistakenly granted Haman the honor instead of Mordechai. Vayomer HaMelech, so the king said, Ma na'asa yekar ugdula le Mordechai alze. What honor, what majesty has been done to Mordechai for this amazing act. Vayomru na'are HaMelech mesharetav, the king's attendants told him, Lo na'asa imo davar, nothing has been done for him. You didn't reward him at all. You gave all the sachar, all the glory to Haman. Vayomer HaMelech, Pasuk Daled, king said, Mi b'chaser, who is in the courtyard? Ve'Haman ba lachatzar bet HaMelech hitzona. Now Haman was just coming into the outer courtyard, lemor lamelech, to speak to the king, litlot et Mordechai, to hang Mordechai ala es asher achin lo, on the gallows that he had prepared for him. The Gemara says he prepared for who? He didn't say prepared for Mordechai, prepared for himself. That was a hint, as a remez, that Haman prepared those gallows for him. Who's him? Me. Eventually, he was to be hung over there. Pasuk, hey, vayomeru na'arei hamelech elav. So the king's attendants told him, Hine Haman omed v'chaser. Behold, Haman is standing in the courtyard. Vayomer hamelech yavo. And the king said, let him enter. And the reason is, I want to test Haman. I want to actually see if he's conspiring against me. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tell him to adorn Mordechai, as we're going to see in the next few Pesukim, who's indeed my friend, and what his response is going to be. Pasuk Vav. Vayavo Haman. So Haman entered. Vayomer lo HaMelech. And the king said, Ma la'asot ba'ish asher HaMelech hafetz bikaro. What should be done for a man whom the king desires to honor? Vayomer Haman belibo. Haman said in his heart, again thinking arrogantly, Let me yachbotz HaMelech la'asot yekar yoter mimeni. Who would the king especially want to honor more than me? Ahasuerus was vague intentionally. He didn't say who it was. He guessed that Haman felt that he was referring to himself. So what does Haman say? Pasuk Zayin. Vayomer Haman el HaMelech. Haman says to the king, Ish asher HaMelech hafetz bikaro. For a man whom the king desires to honor, Pasuk Yud, Yaviu levush malchut. Have them bring royal attire, asher lavas bo HaMelech, that the king has worn. Vesus asher achav alav HaMelech, and a horse upon which the king has rode. Va'asher nitan keter malchut berosho, with a royal crown placed upon his head. So the Ibn Ezra says, contrary to what one would normally describe this pasuk, the crown here was sometimes placed on the horse. They used to place a crown on the head of the horse that was ridden by the king, and once a crown was placed on that horse, no one was allowed to ride that horse anymore. Some want to say that Haman was referring to the man who needed to be honored, that let the royal crown be set on his head, not its head, the horse, but his head, one which the king rode when the royal crown was set on his head at the time of his coronation. We're going to put the king's crown on that of the man. Venaton halevush vehasus al yad ish, pasuk tet, that and let the attire and the horse be given over misarei hamelech apartemim, into one of the hands of the king's most noble officials. Vehilbishu et ha'ish, and let them dress the man asher hamelech hafetz bikaro, whom the king desires to honor. V'yirkivu al hasus birchov ha'ir, and have him ride on that horse through the city square. V'kareu lefanav kacha yaseh la'ish, and they shall proclaim, this is what shall be done for the man asher hamelech hafetz bikaro, whom the king desires to honor. This announcement was very clear. It was simply out of the king's will, that it had to come from the king. This is what exactly the king wants. Moving on to Pasuk Yud. Vayomer HaMelech leHaman. Sure, great advice. The king says to Haman, Maher, quickly, kach et halevush ve'et hasus kasher dibarta. Take the attire and the horse that you have said. Va'aseh chen leMordechai Yehudi, and do all of this for Mordechai, hayoshev b'shar HaMelech, who is sitting at the king's gate. Al taper dabar. Do not leave out one detail. Mikol asher dibarta, from all that you have suggested. So it was clear that Haman wanted to wear that crown. The king was able to read between the lines that this is what Haman wanted for himself. So Achashverosh decided to cut Haman from the roots at that point and making him tend to Mordechai. I am not going to get servants to dress Mordechai and to bring him this horse. You're going to do it. I'm going to lower you immediately. This was also a punishment, says the Al-Shikh and the Malbim, for taking credit for the reward that Mordechai deserved all these years. You're the one who went around gloating that you saved the king's life when it really was Mordechai. Some want to say Ahasuerus was in a hurry to pay off the debt to Mordechai before going to Esther's feast, so that in case she was going to request on behalf of Mordechai, he doesn't know what Esther is going to request. He could say, I already did it. I already dealt with Mordechai this morning. He's taken care of. You have nothing to worry about. Pasuk Yud Bet. We're going to come back to this at the end of the Shi'ur and look at a beautiful midrash. Vayashov Mordechai el Shara Melech. Mordechai returned to the king's gate. Vehaman nidchaf el beto. And Haman was depressed. He was despondent. Avel v'hafui rosh. So he hurried home and his head was covered. So what does it mean Mordechai went back? Vayashov Mordechai el Shara Melech. He returned to fasting. He returned to prayer. Okay, very nice. He had a nice celebration for a couple hours. I'm going back to pray because my people are still at risk. Some want to say, the Malbim writes, no, at this point Mordechai was reinstated to his position of honor, whereas Haman went home in disgrace. And Haman is described here as Avel v'chafui rosh. Avel means despondent or miserable, but we know that Avel or an Avel can be translated as mournful. So according to the Gemara, Haman was actually in mourning. As they passed by Haman's house, his daughter was on the roof at the time, and he looked down and he saw one man leading the horse, carrying another man wearing a crown and royal clothing. So she presumed that it was her father that was on the horse and Mordechai leading. So she took a pot of manure and emptied it on Haman's head, thinking that it was Mordechai. And when he lifted his eyes and she saw that it was her father, she threw herself from the roof and she died. And that's why the pasuk says that Haman was chafui rosh, his head covered with manure. Vaisaper Haman lezeresh ishto, pasuk Yud Gimel. Haman told his wife Zeresh ulkol oavav, and all of his friends, et kol asher karau, everything that took place. Vayomeru, and they said, lo chachama vezeresh ishto. The wise man and his wife told him, well, Haman, I'm sorry to tell you, im mizera Yehudi Mordechai, if Mordechai is from Jewish descent, asher achilot alimpol lefanav, where you began to now fall, lo tuchalo, you won't be able to overcome, you won't be able to prevail against him. Ki napol tipol lefanav, you will undoubtedly fall in front of him. Notice how Haman felt that it was just a coincidence, and the king is still going to agree to kill Mordechai. So he's coming there by Saper, but he's still got a mission. I got to get Mordechai killed. The problem is nobody felt that way anymore. Not his wife and not his friends. In fact, the word for friends, which was ohavav, when they respond, it's no longer ohavav. It's now chachamav, the wise men. And the reason is because now that they saw that he was spiraling downwards, they jumped off the bandwagon. No longer do we love you anymore. Now we're just giving you some very, very wise advice. Get out while you still can. Because if Mordechai is a Yehudi from the Yehudim, you don't stand a chance to defeat him. And the Vilna Gaon says this is in fact was a directive. Your only way out is to let Mordechai win. Give up. It wasn't a piece of advice, says Vilna Gaon. You have to stop. And this was what they told Haman. It seems that Haman was about to listen Odam medaberim imo. The problem is, while they were still talking with him, v'sarisei hamelech higiu, the king's chamberlains arrived. Vayavhilu leavi et Haman el hamishtea she'asa Esther. They hurried to bring Haman to the banquet which she had prepared. Meaning, Haman, according to the Vilna Gaon, Haman actually accepted their advice. He was ready to take down the gallows. However, HaKadosh Baruch Hu had otherwise. At that moment, they came to pull him out of there so that those gallows will be used as evidence against him in the future. And that concludes Perek Vav. I want to go back, with your permission, for a few minutes to that moment where Mordechai is dressed by Haman in these royal clothing, and Haman commanded by Achashverosh to go do so and bring the horse. The Midrash has a fantastic description of the series of events that took place at that point. There's a wonderful lesson as well. I want to read for you the Midrash. What happened at that moment? Halach lo etzel Mordechai. After receiving the orders from Achashverosh, Haman went to go find Mordechai. Kevan shegidu leMordechai shu ba, nityaread me'od. They told Mordechai Haman was coming. He became extremely frightened. He thought this was it. This was the end. Ve'aya yoshev v'talmidav lefanav. Mordechai was sitting, and his disciples, his students, were in front of him. Amar lahem letalmidav. Mordechai told his students, Banai, rutzu ve'ibadlu mikan. Run, escape from here. Shelo tikavu be'gachalti, so that you're not burned by my coal. Meaning that he's going to kill me. I don't want him to kill you as well. Share Aman harasha ba leorgeni. Haman is coming to kill me. Amru, the students told him, Im tamut namut imcha. If you die, we are going to die with you. Amar lahem, after hearing what they said, Mordechai told him, Im ke na'amod bitfilah v'nipater mitoch ha'tefillah. Let us begin praying, so that if we are killed, we're going to be killed in the middle of tefillah, like Rabbi Akiva, right? Although Rabbi Akiva came after this, but nevertheless, let's be killed in the middle of tefillah. Hasalun sloton yatvin ve'askin beilchot mitzvat ha'omer. They finished their tefillah. Haman didn't come yet, so they sat to study the laws of the Omer, not Sfirat HaOmer, but the Korban HaOmer, which is the barley offering brought on the second day of Pesach. Why? Share oto hayom tetzayin benisan haya. Because that day was the 16th of Nisan, as we spoke about earlier, the calculations. Esther had them fast over those three days that overlapped Pesach. Ubeoto hayom hayu makrivin omer bizman shebet hamidrash kayam. At the time that the Bet HaMikdash was around, that day, the 16th day of Nisan, they would bring the Omer offering on that day. So they were studying and they were learning. Ata Haman negabehon. When Haman finally arrived and came towards him, Amar lon, he said to him, Bameh atun askin. What are you studying? Amru lo b'mitzvat ha'omer. They told him, we're studying the commandment to bring the Korban HaOmer. As it's written, when you bring a meal offering, the first grain to Hashem. So Midrash asks a question. Taman Amri, Hilchot Kmitza Achvulei. But in the Talmud Bavli, it says that Mordechai was showing them the laws of Kmitza on how to scoop from the Korban Mincha using your fingers. That's what he was doing when Haman came. Midrash answers, Vedavar echad shayu komtzin mina omer. They're really one and the same. The Kmitza was separated from the Omer offering. So really they were saying about the Omer and the Kmitza as well. This is what happened. And at that point, Haman then took Mordechai, dressed him up, and saddled him on the horse, and off they went parading through town. Now, the Gemara in Masechet Megillah gives a slightly different account of this incident. According to the Gemara, Mordechai and his students studied not the laws of the Omer, but those of a mincha nedava, a donative mincha. And Haman, says the Gemara, exclaimed at that moment that Mordechai's komets, his fistful of mincha that he scooped up, that fine flour that he scooped up, pushed aside his 10,000 talents of silver. Of course, the 10,000 talents of silver that he was willing to give Ahashverosh in order to decimate the Jewish people. Says the Ktav Sofer, he elucidates this exchange unbelievable. He says that Haman, what exactly did Haman wish to accomplish with his 10,000 pieces of silver? And he says Haman offered the money to Ahasuerus not as a bribe, but rather to be distributed among the poor people for tzedakah. And by doing so, he had hopes that that good deed, that act of chesed, Haman, would be a source of zechut, be a source of merit. And Haman's hope of success in his plots against the Jews was rested upon the fact that the Jewish people deserved punishment. They deserved punishment because they bowed down to the idol of to the image set up by Nebuchadnezzar, which we spoke about in the previous shiurim. Haman, however, feared one thing: that the Jews are going to be saved from destruction out of the merit of the mitzvah of mahatzit hashekel, the mitzvah of the yearly half shekel coin donation to the Bet HaMikdash that was mandatory upon every single male. In fact, this coming Shabbat, we're going to read about it. The Shabbat is Shabbat Shekalim. We're going to read Parashat Shekalim, the beginning of Parashat Kitisa. And he knew that machatzit shekel once atoned for the sin of the golden calf. I spoke about this in last week's Parashat HaShavua shiur. Go check out our podcast, our website, to hear it if you haven't heard it yet. It was really, really informative. And that also, the machatzit shekel also atones for idolatry. So what was he going to do to offset that merit, that protection that the Jewish people had? Very simple. He was going to offer an equivalent amount as money and charity for the poor people. And according to some, the 10,000 talents of silver were equivalent to the number of the half shekels given by the 600,000 Jews who left Mitzrayim over their entire lifetimes. That's what 10,000 talents of silver equal to. Now, Haman didn't actually donate the 10,000 talents of silver because Ahasuerus refused it. Ahasuerus says, "Hakesef natun lach," the silver is given to you. But Haman felt that he earned the merit for his intention. There's no Bet HaMikdash. The Jewish people also cannot perform the mitzvah machatzit shekel, but they desired to fulfill the mitzvah, and they were prevented from doing so because of the circumstances that there was no Bet HaMikdash. So they received merit for intent. So Haman also said, listen, I desire to do a good deed. I want to do a mitzvah, but I was prevented from doing so. But I'm also going to receive the merit. I'm also going to receive the zechut, and that's going to offset the protection of Klal Yisrael. What does this have to do with this midrash? When Haman heard that Mordechai was teaching the laws of the mincha offering, or the omer offering that I just stated, he saw and he learned from Mordechai that even though the Bet HaMikdash had been destroyed, the Jews who study the laws of sacrificial offerings are considered by God to actually have brought the korban. They have actually offered the korban, and their sins are forgiven. So the merit earned through study is not just a merit of someone who intended to do the mitzvah and just couldn't do it, but it's more than that. It's an actual bringing of the korban. It carries with it an atonement for itself. So it became clear to Haman that he accomplished nothing by just intending to give the 10,000 talents of silver to the poor people. Okay, so he got a little bit of reward, but it wasn't going to outweigh that of what the Jews were studying the laws of the Omer. The Jews who studied the laws of Machatzit HaShekel, they possessed the merit in order to mamash atone for the sins. It's as if they performed the mitzvah. It was at that point where Haman was forced to admit that the komets of fine flour of Mordechai, that scoop of flour pushed away my 10,000 talents of silver. Haman, says the Yarot Devash, that Haman wished to earn merit by distributing those 10,000 talents of silver among the poor. But According to Yarot Devash, this idea actually originated by from Ahasuerus. That's his chidush is that Ahasuerus had the idea. He learned about the great merit of tzedakah from Daniel. Daniel offered this advice to Nebuchadnezzar, who said, the pasuk in Daniel reads, "V'chata'ach b'tzedakah peruk v'avyatach b'michan anayan." Redeem your sins with charity and your iniquities with kindness of the poor. Meaning, you want to get rid of your sins? Go and do kindness with the poor. Go give tzedakah. So when Haman offered Ahasuerus 10,000 talents of silver to destroy the Jewish people, he suggested, why don't you give it to tzedakah first? So Haman followed Ahasuerus' advice. It's a different way of understanding the story. Says the Yarot Devash, Haman followed Ahasuerus' advice, and he went and he donated the money to the poor, and he was confident that the actual act of tzedakah, of Haman's tzedakah, was going to offset the merit and protection that the Jewish had. He was confident that it was going to push aside any sacrificial offering. You know, the tzedakah nivchar la Hashem, Shlomo HaMelech said, tzedakah is preferred by God mizavach, more than a sacrificial offering. What's better? So Haman never conceded that Bnei Israel's merit outweighed that of his. So what was he telling Mordechai? How do we interpret this midrash? If indeed that Haman gave that tzedakah, he was challenging Mordechai. He says, do you believe that your komets of fine flour, your scoop of fine flour, is going to triumph and outweigh my 10,000 talents of silver? I got you, Mordechai. But what Mordechai answers, says the Gemara in Masechet Megilat, Daf Tet Zayin Amud Aleph, Mordechai reminded Haman that he had once sold himself as a slave to him. Haman was indeed Mordechai's slave. And since all the property of the slave belongs to the master, then the zechuyot, the merit of the charity accrued by Haman, was not going to go to Haman's bank account. It was going to go to Mordechai's bank account. And says the Yarot Devash, an amazing chidush. He says that the mitzvah on Purim, the obligation of every adult to give matanot la'evyonim, gifts to the poor people, was instituted because of this, in remembrance of Haman's failed hopes regarding the gifts to the poor. We are going to show Haman who really has the merit. And that's why we give matanot la'evyonim to the poor people on every Purim. It's an unbelievable midrash of what took place indeed at that moment. And Bezrat Hashem, all the zechuyot of tzedakah, the zechuyot of the korbanot, which we don't have, but we have the tefillah that Mordechai chose to pray at that moment, the korbanot that we read in the morning, the korbanot that we study, gives us the merit that Keilu we actually perform the mitzvah, and through that we are able to offset all evil from us, and will act as a protection for all of Klal Yisrael. Thank you for joining us tonight. Please come back next Wednesday as we continue studying this holy, holy book, the book of Megilat Esther. Wishing everybody a wonderful night. Be well.